I've been covering energy for my entire career at CNBC, pretty much, which is over 20 years. I had the pleasure of getting the OPEC beat in the early noughties, and I've had the amazing pleasure of seeing the stunning development from Kyoto as a nice idea, but actually very little in action. And then I moved on to what I think was the pivotal event for many of us, which was the Paris Agreement, where I was at Le Bourget in Paris at the tail end of 2015. Then, just to spin forward a few years, I was in Glasgow for COP26, and I've just come back from Dubai for COP28, where some of our amazing panel, who are going to come up here now anyway, and I'll just let them go and come and sit down, were also with me as well. And I'm really hoping that what we can really learn from this panel, which is being streamed on two places, it's YouTube and Facebook. There you go. I was going to say all other kinds of social media, but those are the two that are important. I'm really hoping that we can establish that something has happened at COP28. I mean, Dr. Sultan is a man that many of us know, many of us have worked with. He's a very tough businessman. He came in for a lot of stick for being an oil man. He was part of ADNOC as well, and he really bristled at that. And I can be fairly discreet in telling you that when I went to an oil conference before the COP28, I went to something called ADIPEC, which is one of the world's largest oil conferences. He was bristling and saying to me, I am not just an oil man, I will get things done. And that's what I'm really hoping we can learn from this panel, that actually there is renewed momentum in the transition to net zero. I hope I'm going to hear that, but I've got this stunning panel. Some of these are old friends, some of them are very new friends as well. And I'm really hoping that we can learn a little bit about the speed of transition and just a little bit of a recap of what the barriers are and how we can move ahead as well. In no particular order, we have, in fact, I'll start off at the end there. Baatar is someone I've just had the pleasure of meeting. He's the CEO of Rio Tinto Copper. And what is amazing about this company is, hang on, Rio Tinto is a miner. Rio Tinto is one of the pivotal companies because they're investing in copper, they're investing in the key materials needed for the energy transition as well. So we're going to get a really good view on that as well. And I know he's got a holistic view of what's going on as well. Alvera is a man I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years. He's the CEO of TES as well. I've even read his book, and there aren't many businessmen and women, I can tell you, whose book I can honestly say I've actually read. I've read bits of many of theirs, and I have to say that to them, but very few. I've read the whole thing because it's actually a great guide to the world of hydrogen. I would thoroughly recommend it if, and I don't want to give you extra revenues, but I would thoroughly recommend it if indeed you want to know a primer and then going to a deep dive on hydrogen.
Thanks a lot.
You are a great champion of that, and it has been amazing. And I've learned all about the rainbow of hydrogen. Next is a brand new friend, Vaishali, Sinha, who is the co-founder of Renew. I've had the pleasure of meeting your husband before as well on panels, and I know you've got an amazing view on what the whole world needs to do for its transition, not just for some of these rich Western nations who are saying how we can move ahead on one model, because there's not going to be one size fits all as well. A great friend is Henrik, Andersen, the CEO of Vestas as well. You all know Vestas, pivotal company in terms of the transition as far as wind is concerned. We'll move on that. I've actually got the pleasure of speaking tomorrow morning on Squawk Box as well. And of course, Alfred as well. OMV. Well, he says we're one of the smaller oil and gas companies, but you're an integrated company and you do absolutely everything from extraction to servicing the consumer as well. So again, fascinating insight as well. So why don't I just ask that very generic question, which I put to our live stream audience and to you as well, is have we made renewed progress since COP28? Was it pivotal or was it just jawboning and very little new happened as well in the key years? We're already coming towards the middle of this pivotal decade. Have we made real progress? And I'm going to make no bones about it, because I've spoken to these three gentlemen before. I'm going to start off with you, Vaishali, and I just want to know your view, and then I'm going to go to Bold, I'm going to get you, then I'm going to move along, and then we'll move on from there. So just tell me, do you think anything amazing happened out of COP28, or was it just business as usual?
You know, sometimes I feel that business as usual is good business and it's amazing, because I think that's what we need to be able to keep doing things which are important. And I think events like COP and Davos, etc., brings together leaders, the private sector, the civil society to come together and agree on targets and agree on a plan to work together. I think this COP was, particularly useful, and given that I am from the renewable energy space, that, to agree on tripling renewables was, in my view, one of the best outcomes from COP28.
We have some incredible champions of various renewable products here as well. We also have a representative from an oil and gas company that's moving to a huge amount of investment into renewables. But did you feel that actually the inclusion of the big oil players, was it a positive move or was it a negative move?
I think it was a very positive move. I'm not sure if we can make any progress without having an inclusive approach towards our journey here.
Yeah.
And we have to include the oil and gas to transition. What I'd like to see them do more is, I think the oil and gas companies have only invested about 1% in the renewables area or in the mitigation area last year, just to look at data and a statistic. I think we can do more. I think the contribution for them to pivot from oil and gas and to get into other areas, whether it's in terms of investments, whether it is partnerships, is a lot more. I think we really need to monitor the acceleration in getting engaged and at some point perhaps put an end to the emission-oriented materials.
As is my want, I'm going to change the order straight away because you've piqued my interest, and that which means, Bold, just hang on a second. I'm going to go straight to the oil and gas representative as well. You are Mr. Oil and Gas Industry. I know that that's a cruel thing to label you, but that's a good point, isn't it? As an industry, it hasn't invested enough. I know that actually OMV is investing in a hell of a lot of money.
So at OMV, we actually have a strategy which is going to make us net zero by 2050 in all three scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3, right? Oh. And for that, we have to invest quite massively in order to make that transformation. But I like to talk about a responsible transformation, which means actually that we need to make sure that we provide the energies of today and invest heavily in new energies so that we can make that with less emissions, right? And I think that's really important. And for me, in COP28, it was a pivotal point, right? Because we all know what we need to do. I think we all know the problem statement, but it is all about operationalizing it. And I'm not so much into wordsmithing, but when you look at some of the outcomes of COP28, I think the UAE has done a fantastic job to bring people together, make it more inclusive, and in particular, look at some of the finance elements, loss and damage, where there was actual contributions of 800 million, right? Contributions to financing of the green transformation. But for me, the most important thing was this global decarbonization accelerator that was launched, where OMV also signed up to, where a huge amount of NOCs and IOCs signed up to actually become net zero, scope 1 and 2 by 2050, but to become near zero emissions of methane. And methane is a huge contributor to climate warming. Now, is this all enough? Of course it's not enough. But a lot of these companies, they were not looking at that subject at all. Now they signed up, and collectively we have committed to tripling renewable capacity by 2030 and doubling energy efficiency. So now it's in operational, and I completely agree with you, right? It does require the big companies to have the financial power to invest, but also the operational capability to make these investment projects happen.
I'll come to the representative of hydrogen and wind in a few moments' time, but Bold, as I say, we need the materials to be in place. Now, when I look at various materials for the energy transition, I see some wild prices. Rio Tinto has to look through that, has to look through the short-term volatility, whether it's copper, whether it's other products out there. I look at cobalt and lithium and I see the incredible volatility as well. Difficult to do, but you know you've got a job to do in order to provide the materials for the energy transition.
Yeah, I think one of our biggest challenges of the industry is nobody likes mining, especially in their backyard. And it makes it particularly difficult because without mining, we cannot have the energy transition. Everything you see around you is either grown or mined. The steel and the copper comes from somewhere. So when you look at the plumbing in your house, that has to come from somewhere. And the circularity and the recycling only provides 20% of the materials. So we're just going to have to consume 80% less of everything if we wanted to rely on recycling. So one of the biggest challenges for mining is how do we get social license and trust, in particular around the communities who want to benefit also from the energy transition. And in many respects, we forgot in the West that mining has built San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, Salt Lake, and you look about, Denver Nuggets and, all these names, they are the old mining names.
Yeah.
And I think the, developing world wants to benefit from mining, but also jump in its development. So I think the key challenge for a mining company like ours is, first and foremost, we have to work local with the communities that surround the mines. If we have the support, then we can find the engineering and the government permitting. But the community trust is essential for this transition.
I'm just going to be a little bit of a schoolmaster here. I can hear a little bit of chatter at the back. I don't know who it is. If I could just have you pipe down a little bit. Sorry, that's me being a bit bossy. That's my views, not CNBC's, or get in trouble. But absolutely. But why historically have there been so many problems in bringing population, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's mining industry as well? There's been some huge mistakes made. We talk about climate in this panel. We talk about transitions panel. But are the miners cleaning up their act on ESG?
100% Rio Tinto. We are absolutely not perfect. We made our mistakes. And what we need to do better is to make sure that we listen to opposing voices, because they usually have a pretty constructive feedback on where to put the mine. And when we go around social surrounds and assess historical heritage sites, if the local community says there's a burial site of my ancestors, well, we cannot mine there.
Yeah.
And we have to find a solution where we work with the community and co-design and co-develop what is the best way. Because most of the time the communities actually support development, but they don't want to, of course, it comes at a huge price of their societal history.
Let me get back to the same question. I'll first Marco and then Henrik as well. Was it pivotal for you?
For us, it was because we signed a deal with Sultan and with ADNOC right during COP. So there's a lot of concern about the association with business and COP and using COP for business. But actually the number one, and like you have been 20 years in the industry going to many COPs, the number one challenge with the COPs is just the lack of progress on business. So any business deal that is green is good. There's not enough steel being put on the ground or copper being mined and put in the ground. So that's really where we need to make progress. I mean, Alfred was very clear in the benefit of the methane alliance. The industry's been working on this for a while, so I think that's really good. But also to be bringing together these opposing views. You have the climate Talibans on the one hand that want to just electrify everything immediately, and it's all about just getting those 100% to electric vehicles very soon. And then you have the kind of climate deniers or the climate skeptics.
You call the first lot climate Taliban.
You have some kind of extreme versions of, we won't accept anything that is not like 100% electricity-driven industry. And many heavy industries cannot be electrified. So I think what this COP did is it brought together, instead of increasing the polarization at a time when we have extremisms, we have 40% of people going in elections this year. Climate fatigue is the biggest risk to the energy transition.
Yeah.
Climate fatigue is enhanced by interest rates, by the war that drove energy prices really high, by inflation that is driving the cost of renewables higher. So climate fatigue, I think, needs to be addressed with collaboration and with real projects to show that there are some low-hanging fruits there, some technologies there that are in the money already. So when I see Texas and Saudi Arabia, the two kind of oil-rich producing states, being the biggest investors in renewables, that's when I know the energy transition is happening.
And look, as you quite rightly say, there are some people in the climate movement. I spoke to Greta Thunberg here in this very building a year ago. She will never speak to Darren Woods, and Darren Woods perhaps will never speak to Greta Thunberg. But the fact is that certain people, whether they are trying to push very aggressively or those who are just going at their own steady pace, or they think there's a different route to market as well, to get them all in the dialogue is stunningly important. That's what I thought was really pivotal. The fact that for the first COP ever, I spoke to Darren Woods. I can speak to Henrik at a COP because I know that he and his predecessors will always be there because they are pushing very hard for more renewables as well. Did you get anything out of COP that felt more than lip service?
I think it's a stage. It's a stage on a longer journey, and I think COP28. I always I belong to private sector. I live my life with facts. I always say if you want to triple something to the year of 2030, you just need to take a step back. And if you want to triple something, that means that you come a long way. You only have 6 more years, and that means we are already now 2 weeks into the next year. Yeah. And it's a cumulative statement you just made. That means if you are, sorry to say, coming back to the mining and other stuff, if you now have another 24 or 36 months of permitting vacuum or backlog, then you will actually just come close. And I don't like to be the one that sort of spoils Christmas 11 and a half months before, but then you are not going to achieve your tripling a renewable target in just 7 years. So I think it's also a ground zero. Let's get down here. This is what it's about. The year of 2024, I encourage everyone to say that it has to be the year of action. Yep. We published a bit earlier yesterday, we published on the blog, which just says it needs to have a complete reset of how we think on permitting and auction, because otherwise there's not a chance. I'm positive. I have 2 daughters, and they always ask me to get something done of this, because if we are not, we are leaving something in 2030. We know we had the tools, but we cannot do the energy transition and run the risk of destabilizing societies. And what do I mean by that? My good friend here, I had the order booked, so he might want to buy something in the middle of this, or in the end. But in reality here, every time we withdraw something, we need to make sure we have it in position, because otherwise, when you switch the socket on, it doesn't come out with the electricity we need. Yeah. And that whole, if we look around us, I love this. 4 years ago, walked down the middle road here, there wasn't an electric car in Davos for that whole week. Now, half and half, right? But in the homes back home, you also see now that everyone that changes from gas or oil, for that matter, goes into electric heating pumps. Mm-hmm. It just requires a lot more electricity.
So we've created the demand.
We have.
But we just don't have enough supply at the moment. Is that what you're... And by the way, after this question to Henrik, it's open season for all of you. If you hear anything you want to jump in, just let me know and just get in as well. So Henrik, it's the same concern that I hear from you year in, year out, and I've heard from your predecessors as well, is the permitting. Why are governments acting so quickly when it comes to getting their LNG terminals, but so slow when it comes to getting their permitting for wind?
I think there's 2 things. First of all, we live a little bit in a decade ago where it probably has to be subsidized, and that means you both had to find a financial subsidy argument, and you had to find maybe it disturbs local societies. Mm-hmm. If we look at it today, the cost of electricity coming from renewable is competitive. It's competitive to the market price, and that means you have won the first battle, because it means you don't have to compensate. And secondly, which we can also see, I think here's one good thing with both social media and the things going on in local societies. People generally have flipped from being 2/3 against and 1/3 for to now having 2/3 for, as long as they can also be part of it. And that's a change that has happened in the last 5 or 7 years. And I think that gives me a lot of belief that this is actually happening.
What does that mean, be part of it? Sorry, I know you both want to come in. What does that mean, be part of it?
Because you now have that the local sets also their own rule. And I think I see a lot of that around in our more than 80 countries, where you get a part of the payment of permitting locally gets into the sustainability fund of either municipalities or whatever.
Which comes back to the same as mining. You have to empower local people, local populations, in order to feel part of it as well. I'll go with Alfred, then Vaishali is going to come in.
Yeah, I want to build a little bit on this, because I think what is different on the LNG terminals to some other things, I think crises are great accelerators. And this is what we had, and this is what enabled us to move fast. And I think we need to come to more of a realization that both maybe from a global competition, but also from a climate change perspective, we do have a crisis. And we need to shortcut some of these things, right? That does empower. But I want to say a little bit something about OMV, right? Because we are investing about 3.5 billion euros per year up until 2030 to make our transformation. And 40% of that, so 1.5 billion per year, will go into sustainable investments. And when I say responsible transformation, I'm completely with you. You need to replace with something else, right? So what we do is we supply gas today so that people can heat their homes. Tomorrow, and we have active development going on this, we will supply geothermal energy, right? So we will start heating Vienna together with the district heating provider that has 400,000 households on there with geothermal heat. We are drilling down 3,000 meters. We are using our geological know-how, how to drill, how to operate those things in order to provide the heat. This will allow to be more efficient than individual heat exchangers. So we will use less energy, less electricity for this. But this needs to be developed, right? It will take some time to develop for the first 20,000 households, and then in a few years from now, we'll supply 200,000 households.
It can be done. Look what our friends in Iceland have done, albeit with a special geographic and geothermal conditions as well. Vaishali.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, we all have to look beyond ourselves in this transition. It's about, one world, one transition, one goal. And whether it is minerals, I think minerals are concentrated in certain geographies, but we all need them, and we all need them in a way which is accessible, which is affordable. And how do we work together to make that happen? Just going back to your point on COP, I think what I've seen on the ground, especially in India, that the COPs are now not only about governments, it's about national governments, subnational governments, private sector. So when they come back home and when we get down to doing business, I think they're very sensitized and we have common goals. So we've seen some agility around the regulations which are required to solve for issues like, how do we transition from coal to clean? How do we triple? And we are very engaged in those conversations, which I believe is important to accelerate the transition, not only in countries, but across, as I think the national governments have become super ambitious because there is this competition globally to do more and to do better.
Just need them to move from being very competitive in increasing targets to actually becoming
doing more on the ground. I agree with that.
As I said, I've given a couple of big hugs because if you take a Robert Habeck from Germany, he's gone from literally zero permitting in onshore wind to now doing 3.5 gigawatt. That deserves a hug. And I think it also gives a little bit of this sense of it can actually be done. You need to activate your local states and your local municipalities. And without that, we won't have the hydrogen, or we won't do the hard bit with the industrial sector either. So I think I love the competition of increasing targets, but I also like the sense in the lab and saying, can it then be done?
I mean, I just wanted to maybe just share a few numbers. So 7 billion people on Earth, our total car park fleet is 1 billion, and our annual total sales is about 100 million. So at the moment, electric vehicle penetration by 2030 or 35, depending who you ask, will be either 40 to 50%. Every electric vehicle has now 60 kilograms of copper.
Wow.
Where in the past, the internal combustion engine vehicle had only 15 kilograms of copper. So every electric vehicle is quadrupling its copper intensity and consumption. And then you talk about the charging stations, you talk about renewables, you're talking about how to connect the solar and the wind, and it's a massive supply shortage. And the biggest impediment to our development in addressing and increasing the supply is what we talked about, permitting. And permitting is a political electoral cycle of inaction. So if the government has no timeline, it's much better for them not to make any decision rather than lose votes. So the key question is, how do you create a permitting process that is not sequential, that is transparent, that moves in parallel, has the same stringent standards, public consultation process, but then it has a deadline. Within X number of months, 18 months or 24 months, it's finished. Then the business can make a decision, yes or no. This project is dead and we can go move on. But because it drags out for 10 to 15 years, it's impossible to address the supply shortage. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is how do you hold governments to account by having very specific measurable KPIs and deadlines.
Yeah, and let's be honest about it. No one's going to win an election by saying we've increased our copper mining in your area.
100%.
It's 100% the problem.
But also picking up just a little bit, because we always take that as the demand side, and this is the other thing which is playing a little bit with your number is what we also then shouldn't underestimate. Then suddenly we have a fantastic global storage opportunity parked in all our drives. You also just need that little inverter. So at one point in time, that means the renewable industry doesn't have any of this, oh, well, what about if the sun is not out tomorrow? What about if the wind doesn't blow? Because in reality, then you would have a rather large storage thing that could also empower your own household back there. And the good thing with your copper, our copper in the turbines and the copper in the cars and other stuff, we can start recycling it.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a ramp up now, but the recyclability of what we...
Still not enough.
I'll come back to the circular economy.
But that's why you have a business. So I'm a customer of yours, so that's fantastic.
Oh, that's lovely, isn't it? I knew the deals would get done in Davos. I'll come back to the circular economy with Alfred in a few moments' time. Mark,
No, I think Bol at the beginning said something really important. You just can't mine where the local people don't want you to mine. So I think when we talk about permitting, there's kind of the red tape part of it, which should be cut, but there's also the NIMBY part, which is much harder to deal with because you somehow need to engage with them. And that's where I think that molecules and hydrogen can play a big role. Because let's be very clear, and I think this COP has made it clear. Wherever there's a lot of sun and wind, you can make electrons cheaper than the electrons you can make from fossil fuels. So the global average price for electricity is about $110 a megawatt hour, and the cheapest wind and the cheapest solar are kind of below 30. So that has to be the starting point for the discussion. The second point is we can certainly increase the penetration of EVs, and we will. Electricity is now 20% of the energy mix. 77% is fossil fuels. That share will go up to maybe 50, maybe 55, maybe 45, we don't know. But that's the order of magnitude. So you still need about 45 or 50% of green molecules. And those are going to be, half of those are going to be synthetic, so hydrogen-based, and half of those are going to be biofuels or other things like that. So so if we take that optimistic view that we can make cheaper energy today, then we can solve a lot of the permitting issues by putting the panels where it's sunny and the turbines where it's windy, where you have a lot of land. And then moving that energy either by converting it into hydrogen or by building electric cables over long distances. And if you look at the telecom, Google has 20 cables going across the ocean. We'll have the same for electricity. We'll be able to play the spreads between different time zones, between different weather patterns. And as we interconnect the world, we can make it a lot more efficient because there's still a lot of inefficiency in the way systems are run.
I've been talking about better grids for a long time. Obviously not transatlantic necessarily, but better grids, better transfer of that power. Again, it's a pivotal part that we talked about a long time. Henrik, did you want to come in?
No, I'm just saying here, I fully agree. And I think it creates jobs, it creates a future. And even the better thing is, and as we are doing that, we're seeing it, you got carbon-reduced steel already, and there's a lot more to be had of that. So you are now into that there are evidence it can be done. Now it's about getting it, and as you're rightly saying, hydrogen is probably not the most efficient thing to transport as such, so therefore, how do we get it in closer to where it's produced, to get it into the product we then can transport, whether it's ammonia, whether it goes into green methanol or it goes into steel.
ENG, electric natural gas.
Yeah,
that's what we do.
But as I said, it's right up that alley, and that's where, the technology now runs and the demand side runs, and what I'm really encouraged with, it's a little bit back to your point, the electric car is a no-brainer. It's happening because the private consumer takes that decision.
Just need to improve the supply of product, though. So we're not running on the wrong kind of electricity.
Sure, but that also means the politician's job today is no longer to inspire people to make the decision. That's happening. The politician's job is now to meet demand and supply in also making either the permitting or, even worse, avoid the blackouts. Because if we are not clever in electric balancing, we end up having parts of the world, parts of states, where it's blackouts.
Did you want to come in a bit on the circular economy as well? Because we talked a little about recycling of copper. I know that the circular economy is something you're working quite important.
I think it's a good time to come in. You talked about it And I think it's really important to keep this in mind. At OMV, we are focused with circular economy on recycling plastic, basically, right? And when we supply today chemicals, plastics that are made from fossil feedstock, we will tomorrow supply the same things that are made from garbage, essentially, right? And in order to do that, we have just commissioned a plant together with our partner in Germany, Interzero, to build Germany's, not Europe's actually, biggest sorting plant that will sort out about over 200,000 tons of plastics and create the feedstock for our ReOil plant, which is our chemical recycling technology, and separate then basically put it back into the building blocks that we can start chemistry from anew. Why is this good? This is good because it avoids garbage, right, landfill. But on the other side, it's also significantly more energy efficient than starting from fossil, right? And that brings down energy consumption and allows us to close the loop.
There's just on circularity, there's something really neat, and I think Saudi Arabia has been pushing this, a circular carbon economy. When you look at CO2, it's really bad if it goes in the atmosphere, but it's really useful as a carrier of hydrogen. So we've discovered that by combining CO2 and hydrogen, you create synthetic methane. That way you've cracked the hydrogen issues. You no longer have to change any of the backbones, any of the burners, any of the factories, and you can recycle that CO2. So I can sell it to Alfred in one of his power plants. He gives me back the CO2, and it carries the hydrogen all the way from Texas or North Africa into the power plant. So there's a lot of benefit in circularity, also of CO2.
I do want to move on just slightly, because we've got a few minutes left. I want to talk about the financing side of things and how that's changed and whether the capital is available. I keep getting told by a lot of people that we have better databases for evaluating investments in renewables now, for evaluating which companies are making the best moves into renewables and the transition as well. How does the capital situation feel like to you 5 individuals looking for capital for new projects as well? Why don't I start with you, Vaishali, as well?
Sure.
Is the money available for the right projects, or actually is it just still very difficult to come by?
Yeah, no, capital is critical. Obviously, this last year has been quite difficult with the interest rates being where they are. But on the private finance side, private equity side, as far as India is concerned, we've seen a huge amount of growth in private capital coming into the renewables energy space. I think the one area where I've not seen a lot happening is, while there are green bonds, etc., but in terms of the interest rate benefit or the cost of financing, it's not been any better than an average bond. It's just a lot of dressing up and, you know, kind of as opposed to real benefits, given that...
But I'll come back to you. Would the investments look so much more attractive if fossil fuels weren't subsidized to such a great degree? I'm speaking to Dr. Birol again tomorrow, and one of his points I know is that we have trillions of dollars of subsidies for fossil fuels. If they weren't there, my goodness me, the business case for renewables would look jolly competitive. Would that make a difference if we removed a lot of subsidies? I mean, India's a great case in point where there are fuel subsidies.
Right, right. Perhaps yes, of course. I mean, I don't think there is any doubt there. But if I just look at the pie of renewables and how we can do better, if there is more innovation in the structures and the kind of products which are offered, and the amount of capital which is required, I'm sure we can... It's required. I don't think the financial institutions are doing as much as we'd like them to see.
One big failure...
When you're on a panel with Steve first time, you know, when he starts talking about that, you need to be careful. He's trapping sort of...
Okay.
So therefore, just
that's very kind of you, Henrik. Thank you.
Space. I think here it's also, we can always say, capital, should that be for free? And probably that drags also some of the wrong behavior. And we're coming out of a long period of time where no one needed to pay anything for cash or capital because it was interest rate 0 and other stuff. And I think, yes, it's tough when suddenly interest rate goes up, yes. But the other thing which it does, it also highlights everyone on the stage here does actually interact with each other. So private sector comes to each other and saying, how does the PPA look like? And anything that comes and has a proper offtake at a proper market price, that gets financed anywhere in the world. It's only when you start saying this, well, it's convoluted, there is an open-ended risk, we don't know how it's going to be, And
I subscribe to Henrik. It has to be bankable projects, which means the technology is proven, the customer is there, they get financed.
Yes.
But they're more expensive. So because these are capital programs, the marginal cost of the sun and the wind is zero. So most of the energy cost is actually in the interest rate. So that's where governments can really help with lending programs.
Governments can really help by actually having a level playing field, by actually putting a price on carbon, which we didn't really make enough progress on, did we?
But allow the PPA, get the permitting done, then we will fix the rest.
We'll fix it.
I mean, from our standpoint, 3 years ago, during our capital markets day, we put a $10 billion investment target for decarbonization to hit.
Wow.
And it was kind of a pretty bold move because the market price, reacted negatively that day. And now we look at it and we actually saved 40%. At the time we made this headline without full understanding, now we actually have a $6 billion fully financeable FS level feasibility studies. And we are making sacrifices because renewable projects for us will be about 8% cost of, rate of return versus in mining projects we're looking for 12. So we have to make the right choices, but as far as capital, we had to make a decision not to pay dividends.
Alfred, I'll get a comment from you on capital and the price of capital, because obviously you're covering a whole host of products. How do you feel about it? I mean, obviously, yes, people are talking about the interest rate side, but I'm more talking about the level playing field between hydrocarbon and renewable.
I think the importance is really getting bankable projects to get customers to buy the things we started in 2022 to sell sustainable aviation fuels. And what you see there is that initially you find customers that will sign up for it, right? But not everybody will do it. Once the mandates come, a lot more people come in, and that's where the regulator, in my opinion, can help to create the right regulatory environment. But I do agree with you. I think in the end, the problem will only be solved if we unleash free market economy for all those projects that need to happen, and that will require a price on carbon eventually.
Even I, Henrik, have to finish a panel sometimes as well. So, despite the fact that I'm actually due now in about 5 minutes' time to speak to another president. But yes, I am. Not about energy. But I want, in 10 seconds each maximum, one thing that can really get us going and accelerate the transition and get us towards goal, starting in 2024, getting us to 2030 and 2050 goals. Bold, I'll start with you, then I'll move down the line, and then I'll thank you all.
I think artificial intelligence will create a new pathway for material sciences and discovering.
How can I have a panel in Davos without mentioning AI?
Yeah, it has to.
So building factories for electrolyzers, bring the cost down from 800 to 400, makes hydrogen cheaper than oil. We can do that in 3 years. We have to build the factories. Governments need to focus on the supply side.
So says the hydrogen man, it's about electrolyzers.
I just think governments need to collaborate and do more together rather than look inwardly and do more for
And stop worrying about their electoral cycle and think about their children.
40% of the world, as you said, is going into elections. So.
Henrik?
Get permitting.
Permitting, governments again,
No, permitting. That goes for everyone, because permitting is not only governments, it's society. It's society that creates the permitting.
It's us NIMBYs.
So I'm not throwing anyone under this bus, because it's permitting. Let's go back and do it wherever we live.
Alfred Stern.
Risk sharing for new innovation and technology.
What a great final round. We had a bit of everything there, didn't we? I mean, really, thank you very much. You know what, these things are always short and sweet by the nature of them, but Mark Alvera, Baatar, Vaishali, Sinha, thank you very much indeed. Alfred Stern, and I'm even going to thank Henrik Andersen.
You're not.
Alfred, thank you so much indeed, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.